everyone, welcome back to Houses and Hobbits, a Boise Bros production. This week we're going to be talking about creatures of both Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. And to do this week, I actually decided that we were going to each pick 3 different creatures that we liked from whichever franchise we prefer. Me and Alex are going to be talking about Lord of the Rings. Ryan's going to focus a little bit more on Game of Thrones. So let's just hop right into it. Ryan, since you are actually the lesser here because we both chose Lord of the Rings, I actually want you to go ahead and start.
Okay, well, the 3 creatures I chose were 1, the shadow creature from Game of Thrones. They're called shadow
Beasts? Almost?
Yeah. And they're pretty unique, mostly because I like the idea of having these, like, mythical assassins in the world. Their sole purpose is literally to, like, kill someone and then they disappear from existence.
And for context, for people who may not have watched Game of Thrones, the shadow creature that Ryan is mostly talking about is the one that Melisandre gives birth to, that she uses to go and kill Renly Baratheon.
Yep.
And in the show, this is in season 2 at some point. So what fascinates you the most about them?
So essentially, the way shadow creatures are kind of brought about into the world, they're supposed to be a product of,
Shadows.
Well, the Lord of Light is the one who grants the power for Melisandre to have this shadow creature.
Obviously.
Yeah, supposedly.
We've talked about that a little bit.
But what's really interesting is that these creatures, once they are produced, they're given a task. So they are almost unstoppable until they're actually able to accomplish their task. But they're kind of like a one-trick pony. Once they've done their one thing that they were created for, vanish, they're gone. They're able to, they're not harmed by anything.
No.
They're able to either hide in shadow or take a physical form of whatever they would like to, like, kind of look like. They're unstoppable creatures that really have no limitations besides the fact that they're only used for one purpose.
Well, not to prove you wrong on this one, I'm curious, because the one that we're familiar with, obviously the way that it goes about and the way that they make it seem is, so Melisandre approaches Stannis and, she says, I'll give you a son, and that's something, he wants an heir for when he eventually takes the Iron Throne, if that ever happens.
Yep.
And so, they have sex and all this stuff. And then later it makes it seem like that, the product of that, and obviously through King's blood and shadow magic and whatever shadow binding she did there, she gave birth to this thing. And it goes and it fights and it kills Renly. And the way it's described by Brienne from that moment on, because she sees it kill Renly, is it was a shadow with the face of Stannis Baratheon. So does it necessarily actually take its own form? So did you find anything else in your research?
Mostly, it looks like the shadow creatures are able to choose the form that they would like to hold. Okay. So I kind of felt that when it kind of took the form of Stannis, it's because, that was its, like, father. Yeah. So it just felt like a connection to that. Okay. But I don't even think they're able to think in a way.
Oh, no, yeah.
To where they get to even, like, decide what they want to look like. I think it's honestly like, this is going to
And that kind of goes back to what you said. Like, they have a purpose, and once they fulfill that purpose, they're free to go.
Yeah, they're kind of like, you did your job, get out of here.
Okay. Like Mr. Meeseeks from Rick and Morty.
Yeah, a little bit.
I killed Renly Baratheon!
That's honestly exactly what it's like.
Well, he dragged me into this!
Yeah, so that one task is really cool. And that's kind of why I like the shadow creatures. Mostly because I think they're, like, probably extremely powerful. Because we weren't really told about any limitations they would have.
Be interesting if, like, the Faceless Men would use them. Because then you don't even have to throw an actual body out there. You just throw out this shadowy monster. It goes and kills, whoever for you.
Yeah, obviously the process of making them is a little vague.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
One was given birth to, apparently.
So it was given birth to, but it was also like a whole ritual on top of just giving birth. So it's a whole big thing. I don't think it's as easy as just, like, making them off the fly.
But it's just an interesting aspect of the world that we saw one time in both the book and the show, that these things came into being. And that kind of goes with Melisandre having learned how to be a shadow binder when she lived in a Shire, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Okay.
Less magical, more creature, the deep ones. So In the Game of Thrones world, they have their own kind of version of Atlanteans, I guess you would say. They're half man, half these like fish creatures. Really think like merfolk from any lore. And there's not much talked about them. Mostly in the drowned gods and everything. They're supposed to be like worshippers of the drowned gods. And the reason I think they're really interesting is because it's just so vague, because mostly it's just in history that we're able to learn about them.
Well, I like that you brought them up, because two of my favorite Game of Thrones related channels, just shout out to these two guys. Alt Shift X does great work where he analyzes both the books and the shows. And then there was Ideas of Ice and Fire. It's now known as Quinn's Ideas. And they both love talking about these Lovecraftian deep ones.
Yeah. So in Lovecraftian lore, the whole Cthulhu pantheon and everything like that, they actually have these people that worship them that are half fishmen. They come from the deep in order to like take the souls of men and everything like that.
Or like take the seed of men is like one of the things that they're always talking about.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's supposed to be specific, like, seed is in sexual, or seed is in like you're just killing them. It's pretty vague, but it's really cool because the mystery behind it. So it just shows that like Martin definitely has this like idea for more than what we are just witnessing.
And it's more world building, and I love that kind of stuff because it shows you a story that's happening behind the story.
Exactly. And then to kind of capitalize on that, my third monster that I really wanted to talk about were the Krakens. Now, there's an entire family that is dedicated to these creatures. And it's just very interesting because we never see one.
No.
Never see one. Really, the only way you're referencing it is as though you were referencing like the lion for the Lannisters.
Exactly.
Where it's like you don't see lions, but that's the symbol for that family.
There are many times, especially in the books, where you have characters who kind of have these prophetic visions of other characters who are associated with Euron Greyjoy, and they say, "Oh, I see the Kraken's tentacles around you," and they think, "Well, no, what? What are you talking about?" And it's just in reference to the Greyjoys, in the fact that their house symbol is a Kraken.
Yeah, so it's more metaphysical, where it's like you're perceiving them as the Kraken. So you're kind of seeing them as like they're the creatures that kind of rule the seas, and that's exactly what they do.
And in two prominent families, you have both the Greyjoys and the Targaryens, where they always have like this hope of not always, but there are certain members of their family who hope that by accomplishing some task, they can become either a dragon, in the case of one of the kings who drank wildfire in hopes of turning himself into a dragon.
You would hope, I guess.
You would hope. Why would you drink something like that melts everything? And then you have certain Greyjoy members who fancy themselves like that, where they want to become a Kraken or a god of some sort.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
They drown themselves thinking that that's going to give them some sort of power.
Interesting.
And so like to kind of go on top of that, not only is the Kraken kind of a really cool idea, but the Greyjoys also have this within their lore, these like sea dragons.
Which Naga was one of the sea dragons.
So Naga was supposed to be the most powerful sea dragon, and one of the Greyjoys, was it one of the Greyjoys?
No, if I recall, I could have sworn in the lore of it was actually, why did I just forget his name? The Drowned God.
Yeah,
was the one who just slayed Naga.
So someone conquered it, and that like they
or actually, it might have been the Greyjoys.
But it's just really interesting that like you can tie so much of this like fantasy aspect that you really don't see in the show at all. You have all these fantastical stories that are told about their founders of these houses. Yeah, and it really builds onto the world as a whole. So I'm really hoping like if Martin ends up kind of going through and doing prequels or anything, like it would be really interesting to go to this time where all of these stories are supposed to be taking place, where the world is more magical than it is currently. Because I just think it'd be really interesting to see the fantastical side of all of these creatures and the stories that they come from. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, it's just kind of cap off on the Game of Thrones lore for just a second. Is you have so many of these creatures that by the show and book timeline standard, so many of these creatures are now considered either not real, they were myths from the very beginning, Or in like the case of dragons and White Walkers, you have this resurgence of these old creatures that we thought were either dead or never existed in the first place. So it'd be really cool if HBO or Martin, either or, I don't care, if they do some of these more prequel-based series, show us some of that.
Yeah,
show us some of these
far
things.
enough back to show if the myth is real or not.
I mean, I love in the books, and they do kind of poke a little bit fun at it in the show, but it talks about how when the White Walkers first came, they'd ride these ice spiders, big as hounds and everything. Like, those are the kind of things I'd love to see at some point if they ever continue to make that world bigger.
And to be clear, we've never seen or like in the show or in the books like a Kraken or deep ones.
Nope.
They're
these
mentioned.
These are hinted at.
Yeah.
And I mean that's fine. These are some of the things that I really find fascinating. These creatures are really cool, just because of the fact that they're there in story and legend.
Are there any indications that they have gone extinct or something has happened to them at all? Or is it just they're mentioned?
It's kind of more left up to interpretation. It's kind of unknown.
And I like that. I prefer it to be.
And with the deep ones and the Kraken per se, you have an ocean that's just as vast as our own oceans on the real world that these things could be hiding in, that you would never even know that they existed.
I mean, House Targaryen, their symbol for the house is a dragon,
yes.
right? And we see dragons come back in the Game of Thrones with the three,
absolutely.
Right? And we're like, okay, clearly that's something that is real, and we can see examples. So having a Kraken as your house symbol would be like, well, obviously,
and like there are certain things like that with like direwolves where they're not as fantastical, they're not as mystical or mysterious, so it's easy for them to be the sigil of House Stark. Lions, they're apparently a common thing in the universe. We never see them except for in reference to Lannisters, but it's possible.
And even in the books, you don't see those as much either. Like, there's no, like, lions in the books.
Literally, like, the only remembrance of a lion being mentioned was in the Age of Heroes, Lan the Clever, who became the head of House Lannister, or some guy related to him somehow found the cave that would become Casterly Rock by chasing some lions to a den, and he found this cave that was just glittering with gold, and that eventually became Casterly Rock.
Huh.
And that's, how the Lannisters kept up their wealth for so long. So it's possible that all of these creatures absolutely exist, and we just never see them.
Yeah, and there's plenty of sea scenes in the series, too, to have a Kraken pop up, or even a mention of it, which is interesting that the creators didn't touch that and kind of stayed true to the books.
And I mean, that's just kind of their thing. If we're talking just show purposes, they were kind of moving away from the fantastical elements as they went. Anyway, so with all of that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the thing that both of us clearly seemed a little bit more interested in. You, for obvious reasons, you haven't delved into that as much. But
I've read the books, haven't seen the series, want to. But Lord of the Rings, yes.
So let's talk about your three favorite creatures, or ones that interested you the most.
So the ones I wanted to talk about most were, and I think the first one's interesting because it has kind of a connection to Game of Thrones, is the wargs, right? So you have these messed up, snarly, like larger than like most goblins and things, wolf things. They're kind of like cougars. They're like a mixture thing.
Well, especially in the movies, they look very like not wolf, but not cat. Not.
If I turn an alley, I'm not going down that alley if that thing's at the end of it. I'm not. So
it always threw me for a loop when I got into Game of Thrones, because you have Bran who has the act of wargame, which I was like, it's literally spelled pretty much the same way. Yeah. But I'm thinking of the giant wolf things from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and it was really interesting about them is they have a specific relationship with like orcs and goblins, right? For some reason, like that's what they like tend to like more. You don't see humans and them interacting.
I would assume, I'm not sure about this, and forgive me for not researching that. They weren't really the creature I wanted to focus on for my stuff. But I want to say that they were probably bred like specifically to be mounts for that.
Right.
I don't feel like there's much mention of wargs being in the wild, but correct me if I'm wrong. But and comments correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know as well either. But it seems like as they're portrayed in the movies, you always see them with goblins, with orcs as these mounts. But when you see them disconnected, you don't ever see them go after their masters either.
No.
So there's not like a ferocity there.
And not to say that they won't eat a dead body of their master. They will, absolutely. I know that they've eaten orcs or whatever. They eat whatever's around.
Yeah. They're not like the most intelligent
but they're also
creatures.
not disloyal as long as their master is still alive that we see.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me wonder like what the goblin like orc practices are of like like both breeding and like taming these things to be like these sort of ferocious war animals. It's goblin practices and culture like that's just
tell you.
I don't know.
I bet you anything based on what you see of orc culture. There's a lot of whipping. There's a lot of abuse
imagine
involved.
It's not the kind where you have a loving relationship.
No.
But wargs are pretty cool, and the connection with the direwolves, and I think we can talk about that a little bit later. But wargs first off, so cool, so ferocious.
and I always love that scene in the middle of Two Towers. It kind of gives us a little bit of action when we've been really needing it, where everybody's heading to Helm's Deep, and Saruman sends out the Warg Riders, and you have this really kind of fun thing. Right. And there's just so many fun areas in that particular scene with just the wargs.
Remind me if I'm not remembering correctly, but you don't really see wargs outside of that scene.
No, literally the only other time I remember seeing a warg, besides in the Hobbit movies, which I don't really want to go into as much. Didn't like the movies as much as the book. Sure. But you see a warg carry the orc general up to Minas Tirith in, I want to say it's the expanded version versus the theatrical cut. Yeah. He's just there. In the expanded version, he's riding up on this warg, and it's kind of a little bit comedic world building scene where he like throws the reins to it, and somebody has to help him get off the warg because it's so big for him. Right. So that's the only other time besides in the Hobbit movies.
You don't see them in the wars. You don't see them in like the bigger battles. It's like go after the hobbits in the fields or this one general.
Pretty much.
Which is interesting, cool, because like I guess they're not things for war. I don't know.
I mean, of course, there's something for war, but
like we don't see
maybe on like an open field versus a siege where you need more troops, you need ladders, you need thinking beings for that.
Speaking of creatures for wars, I know you were going to talk about one that takes to the skies a little bit.
Yes. So one of the creatures that I just find fascinating, and I just love the way that they were portrayed in the movies in particular, were the fell beasts, as they're called. It's just the name that it's kind of been adopted because Tolkien described them as felled, and they were a beast of some kind.
Right.
So we've just kind of adopted that term, and they're just like these wyvern-like creatures that the Nazgul ride upon into battle, and I just love the way that they used them, and they were a really fun unit to use in Battle for Middle-earth, which is one of my favorite Lord of the Rings based games.
I didn't know you get to play on top of one.
So you could actually summon a hero, which was one of the Nazgul, and you get 3 at a time is the max you can have, but you just send them out and they just pile drive into whatever units are coming at them, lift them up, and just like rain them down on people.
Remind me, they don't breathe fire, right?
They don't. No. They, from what I read in my descriptions, the spines on their back could be poisonous, per se, and they have a very foul breath that is meant to instill fear.
Right.
But they don't breathe fire, per se.
And again, we don't see a lot of them in the series either.
No,
like
legit, we see it twice in the Two Towers. Once it's flying over the Dead Marshes. The other time is when they're at Osgiliath and Frodo almost gives the ring to the guy and Sam's attacking him down.
Really sick cinematic shot
that
of like
really slow-mo fun stuff there.
Oh man!
But then you get to see them again in their full glory in the Siege of Minas Tirith. And I love when they first come in because it almost seems like the good guys are getting this advantage where they're using the trebuchets to launch all these rocks down on the orcs. And then all of a sudden, just you hear the sound of these things coming out of the sky, and just watch as they just start tearing the trebuchets apart, lifting men up, dropping them from like really far up, just instilling this fear into the defenders of the city.
That embodiment of evil.
I love
them. I don't even think dragons in the series, like we talked about the Hobbit, obviously with Smaug and all that, but like even dragons don't like bring up that like level of evil that those things.
Dragons are just greedy, and like the way Smaug is, he's just selfish, he's greedy, and he's just obsessed with himself. He's
Right.
obsessed with his own greatness.
These fell beasts, the
fell beasts are literally made just for the Nazgul to ride upon, causing even more fear than they already do.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us were going to talk about this, but the Nazgul had a steed before.
Yeah, they had horses.
They had those dark.
Those dark.
And I don't know if they're like a
red-eyed
special type
horses.
of horse or not, but
I would say if there's anything special about them, it's maybe some sort of selective breeding or maybe some magical ability that we may not have seen, but that's about it.
yeah. But yeah. Solid fell beasts. They are solid, horrifying creatures.
Kind of in the vein, just while we're talking about the fear that they instill in Return of the King, one of my favorite scenes after this really triumphant thing for the riders of Rohan, and it seems like the siege is broken, and we're finally gonna save Gondor. Now, all of a sudden, you hear that war horn, and you see in the distance 20 giant elephants, the Mumakil, Oliphants.
Yes.
There's something about just taking a creature that we know and making it 10 times bigger. These things are about the size of a small skyscraper with their giant war tent on the back, and you have
their tusks, and
you have
the
the way that they
snipers
had
on
put
top.
on their tusks these horns.
That's pretty awesome.
And they walk around and they're just destroying the horses, and it's
all the spikes,
all,
and they're just
all the
ripping through
hope,
people.
all the hope that you just had that the war is about to be ended in this one great charge is now dashed as you see these giant things come out of nowhere. And they just lead to some really fun stuff, and the war strategist in me was always just like, why aren't you jackasses turning around and going back into the city and getting on the high ground and just sniping them from afar? Why are you charging into them? Hopefully the walls would hold up against these, but who knows? Those things, their strength is
and again,
crazy.
I do wonder if these are again bred by orcs, goblins,
from the research I did and from one of the books I had, it was talked about that in Harad Waith, the land where these people come from, these were in the wild and they were tamed at some point. Ultimately, I think that this event was what led to their extinction.
Yeah. Because, I know which is extremely sad, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
But also in reality, I imagine, you have elephants that are just these kind, creatures that go and, they walk around, they have little ones, whatever else. Mm-hmm. But then you have these people come in, take them, and then turn them into these ferocious war beasts. Yeah. And it's man, I feel bad for these elephants. They look super scary, and they're causing so much destruction. But they're probably, pretty simple, kind creatures.
I was going to say, outside of this, outside of being tamed by these people and made for this purpose of war, I think that they would have been gentle creatures. But obviously, we don't see that outside of
we
this.
don't. That's the part of speculation.
But they were one of my personal favorites. I always loved them. And talking about Battle for Middle-earth again, it was super fun because you get this giant tent that you breed these things in as a unit, and they come out and just immediately they rise up from the ground as this immediately huge thing, and they're fun to use. So that was always a fun part of that game for me.
Yeah, another fear-instilling moment, back to a creature that I want to talk about, was, you have the Fellowship of the Ring, right? We're going to go see the Mines of Moria, right? We're really excited, and there's this magical puzzle. Everyone's like, what's going on here? And then I think it was in the movies, it was the Hobbit, the brotherly Hobbits, right? They're like, they're trying to figure out this puzzle. I'm going to throw some things.
Pippin's throwing some rocks into the water, and Aragorn just grabs his hand and he says, "Do not disturb the water." And you're just kind of oh, Aragorn knows something, dude. He knows. and then so finally, and sorry to take your thunder here, but I just love reliving this scene where finally Frodo goes up to the puzzle door and he's like, oh, it's a riddle. What's the Elvish word for friend? And then finally Gandalf remembers melon, and the doors open up and they're finally, okay, we can go inside. And then they see all the dead dwarves, and they're like, okay, we gotta get out of here. And as soon as they leave, all of a sudden the Watcher in the water.
Oh, man, yeah. watching the
line. And it just starts attacking everything. It goes for Frodo, and it seems like it's almost drawn to the power of the ring.
And if you read, and then there's a part in the book where they kind of explains this scene, like there's this like dark, malevolent force coming from the water, and Gandalf's being like very wary of it the whole time, and then it erupts, and you have these tentacles, and you know, like all of these sort of like darker creatures, they have some kind of connection to this darker ring, right? So obviously it's grabbing Frodo. It's like, our hero, oh no, he's in peril again. And Frodo's like, he's flying around.
Many times Frodo is just in peril for the reason that he's just got the ring on.
Time to save Frodo again.
Good lord.
But yeah, and what's really cool is when I was researching this monster, it has kind of a deep history about, it was in this war, and then it was, never seen again for a while.
Really?
Yeah, there's a whole history about it, but one of the most...
Was it in one of like the Dwarven Wars?
I think it was in... Yeah.
Okay.
It was in a higher land, and it like made its way down like this greater river after it had like its first appearance, and it wasn't seen for a long time. And then the next mention of it we have is in the books in this series, where it's just popping out of this water in front of the Mines of Moria, and it's grabbing people, whatever. But there's not a cement description of what it is.
Okay.
Even in Tolkien's like
Legendarium is what we kind of call it.
Right. He only ever explains it in that little scene as like this thing with these tentacles, right? We don't know what a full picture of this
so
thing
in the
looks
book it
like.
is described as this tentacle monster.
Yeah, this tentacle monster whipping around quickly,
Because
darkly.
I always liked the way, and it was kind of different from what you think a kraken normally looks like.
Yeah,
when it surfaces, like its face surfaces, all of a sudden it almost looks dog-like. Yeah. Like the head looks kind of dog-like, where it has this snout, and then out of nowhere, just like this mouth that's just like a typical octopus or kraken mouth shows up and is trying to devour Frodo and whatnot.
Yeah. Side note on you remember I think it was Attack of the Titans or Clash of the Titans, that big movie, whatever, and then the Krakens, the entire thing, and then it pops up, and you're like,
remake, it looks like it's a bipedal monster.
Right, it's got like crab legs and it's got arms and whatever else. Yeah. It's like, okay, they've fully exposed the Kraken there. What Tolkien, I think, does better is it only shows those tentacles and leaves everything else.
One of the things about like horror movie elements is you always like it when the monster isn't fully seen.
Yeah, when you fully see it,
because then it takes away from the mystery of it, and that's what makes like the Game of Thrones monsters Ryan was talking about so compelling. Is like, we think they might be real.
You don't even know.
We think they might be there.
The stories are horrifying, but we've never seen it in person ourselves, right? So if they come back, what will we do, right? Yeah.
If the deep ones rise up, if the Watcher in the well somehow comes onto land and is like a giant Clash of the Titans style Kraken, what are we going to do against that?
Frodo pulls out Medusa's head, and everything just freezes. But essentially, So I think one of Tolkien's creations that is not fully explored, but still has a very compelling little side story. The Watcher in the Well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very very fun.
So kind of on the flip side of that, so you talked about something at the start of Moria. I want to talk about something that is at the end of Moria, and it's
you all know exactly.
You all know the Balrog of Morgoth is just a fantastic creature. I love the way it's portrayed in the movies. I love the way that it's just talked about. You have this really subtle scene that I like where the Fellowship is trying to make its way across the pass of Kirhadras. Forgive me for butchering that.
If you haven't put the comments.
And they're going through this winter storm that Saruman has basically summoned just to impede their progress. And then when finally there's this lull where Frodo's trying to think, what's our next course of action? Do we keep going? Do we go through Moria? Do we just abandon the quest altogether?
Gimli's all for Moria. He's like,
Gimli thinks everybody's still alive at this point, so he's just like, why aren't we going and hanging out with my people?
Yeah, we have a grand feast.
Treat us to a banquet. But so then you have this.
He had a rough day that day, didn't he?
He really did. You have this cutaway where Saruman is monologuing almost to Gandalf, but it's like, what they found in there. Those dwarves dug too deep and too greedily, and they found something that was lost, a creature of shadow and fire. Mm-hmm. And And when he's looking through the book that he's reading, all you see is just its eyes and like the silhouette of its horns. And it's just this cool build-up for then later in the movie when it finally shows up after smashing down all these walls. Oh. And I love the moment where Aragorn draws his sword after they hear it for the first time. And Gandalf literally says, "Put your sword away. You literally can do nothing against this creature. It is beyond your power." And that is just a really intimidating feeling.
I think what made the entire entrance of the Balrog so horrifying was you had the entire fellowship chased by all of these goblins, right? They were completely surrounded. Like, it was over for the fellowship. There was no chance. And they all go, "Eh," and then they leave. Yep. They're gone. No, this horde of goblins is like, "Nope." And they're all like...
Well, it seems like it's almost implied, and in one of my world books for the movie universe, it talks about how the Goblin's armor, the way they made it, was in a way that was to emulate the flame of the Balrog.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
It's like they were treating it like a god, and it basically came out of there and just said, "Listen, here's my sacrifice. Y'all get out of here." And they listened. They left.
That's cool.
And it's really a neat moment.
I wonder if it speaks Goblin.
Probably not.
It probably roars and they go, "All right."
I mean, it just shows up with its whip and it's just like, "Listen, get up."
You only tell us twice. They go.
Get back to work, slaves.
Yeah, Balrog, and I think an underrated scene that people don't talk about too often. You see, I think it's in Two Towers where you have the continuation of what happens when Gandalf and the Balrog have both fallen, and you have like this midair clash.
It's so cool. It was one of I remember just being a little kid and watching that scene for the first time, and obviously I thought Gandalf was dead in the first movie, and then just seeing how he and the way that scene ends, I still think he's dead by the end of it, because who can survive a fall like that into water where they just smash into it like that?
Yeah,
but it's such a good opening because whips him up and then he grabs his sword midair and just starts whacking at that thing. And then later, I love its final scene where they literally battled from the bottom of Moria all the way to the top, and Gandalf finally strikes it down with a lightning strike to his sword. So that's fun.
Yeah. Then he comes back as Gandalf the White.
Sorry, I just had to gush about the Balrog. It's just a fun creature. I love it. And there's so much more about them in the books. They helped in the fall of Gondolin in the Silmarillion, so that was always awful, but at the same time, if you're a Balrog fan, you love that kind of stuff.
So, last question. Balrog has wings.
So in the movie, yes. In the book, it's not necessarily made clear if it has wings. It's possible just because of the fact that it's like this constantly moving thing with its shadow and fire body.
When I was 7 or 8, and this is kind of funny because I actually didn't watch Lord of the Rings in the right sequence. I started with the Twin Towers because my dad just got me. He was like, "You'll probably like this. It's got wizards," and he got me Two Towers as a movie, gave it to me to watch, and I loved it. I had no clue what was happening in that scene. Yeah, right, because it just shows this old man and this horrifying monster.
This old man screaming about he's a member of the secret fire, and all of a sudden the thing whips his leg and he says, "Fly, you fools!" and does a Jesus pose as he falls into the chasm.
And I'm like, who are the fools? Why are they following? And I was like, oh, who do I root for? I was just like a young, I had no clue what was happening, but I was like, this is exciting, And then Frodo wakes up and I'm like, oh, it was all a dream. Nothing of it was real. And then Gandalf comes and he's like, I'm Gandalf the White. Oh, he was real. So it was as a kid. I was very confused, but I was so into it.
That's funny.
But
I like it.
But to flip it, since we've been talking about very dark creatures, I wanted to end our Lord of the Rings discussion with a creature that's actually of light, or maybe a little bit kinder. You summon them with a butterfly, and the great eagles appear that carry Frodo and Samwise from the melting that is Mordor after they've destroyed the ring, right back into their comfy sheets. And all their friends coming through the doors, and it's like you see them for a very short time. And I know the Hobbit kind of goes into more, they appear a bit more, but
definitely more so in the book. And then they showed them in the movies a couple of times. The way that they were used in the Battle of Five Armies, the movie, I didn't like as much. My childhood, my imagination was so much bigger about the Battle of Five Armies. So when the Eagles show up in that, it's just like it's essentially for the good guys what the fell beasts are for the bad guys.
Right.
Like that's always one of my favorite scenes in Return of the King is when all hope seems lost. You know, you have our suicide mission to kind of keep Frodo from getting discovered. And the fell beasts are flying in, and out of nowhere, here comes the eagles, and Pippin, super bright-eyed and cheery. The eagles are coming. The eagles are coming, and yeah, it's essentially that.
They're just lovely little characters.
They're lovely creatures, and they're intelligent. They have their own society,
and there's some magical connection to them and Gandalf as well. I don't know if it's between him and them specifically.
I don't know if it's a magical connection or if it's just a.
I mean, the only way that I don't know if it goes into the books more, right?
Maybe.
But it seems in the movies there's something with a butterfly, then the eagles come. So I'm like, there has to be some spell that's main component is a butterfly and maybe some words that gets you through eagles.
The way that it works, it almost seems like it's speaking their language to him.
It's
like every time you see the moth come onto screen, both in the Fellowship when it comes to him while he's on top of Isengard. And in Return of the King, he sees the moth in the heat of battle, and all of a sudden you just kind of hear like this whispering.
Yeah, it seems like communication.
It seems like it's some sort of communication. Like the moth is like the herald of the eagles. It's so weird.
You have all these like great avian birds like waiting for like quests and things, and you just have a moth that's like, "Sires, I have a request to bring hobbits from Mordor. It's on fire!" And they're like, "Caw!" And it's like, "Great, I'll let him know." and of course you have the he she, you know, how it should have ended productions where they're like, "Why didn't they send
I knew you were going to bring that one up. And everybody has to bring it up. Why didn't they use the eagles to take the ring to Mordor? Oh, when Gandalf says, "Fly, you fools," he was telling them to go use the eagles. No. I'm telling you right now, first off, in the context of the story, the fact that the ring is always trying to find its way into the hands of something with more power. If the Eagles had gotten a hold of that, it would have been even worse for Middle-earth. So it's honestly best that it was in the hands of a hobbit that was just sneaking his way into Mordor.
Yeah.
Trust me, it would have been bad otherwise. You already saw what Galadriel did when she almost got the ring. Can you imagine like a race of like sentient eagles turning evil?
Oh man, oof. But I mean, to be fair, I think what really allowed those eagles to get into Mordor and out with the hobbits is that they had the war at the Black Gate. They were winning, you know. And
by that time, the great evil is now gone. It's been destroyed. Right. So at that point, like, you can go into there.
The eyes blinked out.
And that's the other thing, is like, if you don't think the Eye of Sauron's not going to notice a giant eagle like flying above and dropping the ring into the volcano, it's just like,
you think I'm gonna let this happen? Are you kidding?
And then you know he has access to fell beasts. He has access to all of these other creatures that could probably take these things out of the sky.
Right.
Just let it be. Let the hobbits do their job.
Let it be.
So, but that's I love the Eagles. In one of the video games, it was War in the North. You get an eagle that is like your friend, and I can't remember his name, but you start to care for that eagle, and he like almost kills himself one time, and then you have the option. It was one of the few times it gave you like a choice where you could have used him against the final bad guy, but it would have ended in his death, and I was like, no. I'm gonna let the eagle live because he's such a chill character. I don't want to do that. No, I'm gonna fight this guy on my own. So.
A question I have for the Game of Thrones side of it all, because we've talked, I think, a lot about a lot of flying creatures that we have in Lord of the Rings. Are there any, besides the dragons, is there
really just
else?
Dragons?
Yeah, they command the skies.
I'm trying to think of anything else that's even close.
There's different forms of dragons, like there's an ice dragon, but it's just dragons.
Well, and the problem with the ice dragons, the World Book by George R. R. Martin with the help of another author, does talk about ice dragons, but not in the sense that the one we're talking about that helped destroy the wall in Season 7 and subsequently helped attack Winterfell in Season 8.
Yeah, it was like a natural ice dragon.
There's a natural ice dragon that's supposedly even bigger than normal dragons that lives in the far north of the Shivering Sea, north of Essos. And their breath is supposed to be able to freeze a ship solid, but the only reason that you can't prove that they exist is because either A, obviously anybody who encounters them probably dies, and B, if they die, they melt. So you can never actually find the body.
It does make me wonder how the rumor got started then.
Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of things in Game of Thrones are just left
and that's actually kind of what I wanted to finish on was, so with Game of Thrones, you have a lot more mystery of things. Before we get back into that, I will mention one creature that was interesting to me in just that I found out that these came from something way greater than themselves. And so you have the giant spiders in Lord of the Rings, like Shelob.
Yeah.
And all of the giant spiders can trace their descent, like their ancestry, back to Ungoliant, which was this great spider-like creature, but it was also a being of like darkness. And it fed on light. And I talked about, so there were the 2 lamps and then there was the 2 trees.
In the religion episode, right?
It was actually last episode, the magic episode.
Oh, magic episode.
So you had the era of the 2 trees, which were giving light to the world, and obviously the seed of each of these became the sun and the moon. But the reason that those trees died is because Morgoth made an alliance with Ungoliant, and he brought it to the trees, and it sucked them of all their light because Ungoliant fed on light, and it would make her even bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, she got so big that she tried to attack Morgoth. Yeah. Because he had the Silmarils, which were light encased, like they were basically... an artist took the light of those trees and encased them into these precious jewels. And he held on to the Silmarils, and Ungoliant tried to attack him because these are the last of the light of those 2 trees. Give that to me. Feed me. But so Ungoliant eventually would give birth to all of these giant spiders that would lead to Shelob and all of that.
And the only other time we see spiders too is in The Hobbit when you have like they're going through the elven forest and the spiders are coming.
Same thing.
But yeah, are there spiders in Game of Thrones?
There's ice spiders referenced.
There's reference to ice spiders, but that's about it.
There's normal spiders, but
yeah.
Also, there's a. I don't know if this would be considered a race or if it's a creature, but the troll that helped out Stark when they came for the guys who skinned people, like he helped them.
Oh, you mean the giant?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a giant.
That's a giant.
So
it's a race.
Okay,
Giants are race.
I mean,
people.
we could consider them also creatures of their own right, but they're kind of their own race. They had a king. They had all these things.
I would say they're not really creatures. They're their own people.
They had their woolly mammoths that they would ride on, and most of those died at the assault on the wall.
Oh, okay. So this okay.
Yeah, so they're a race instead.
But spiders, only ice spiders are ever really mentioned as a giant.
Do we
spider.
see more than just that one giant, Ryan, or is that kind of?
So
that's the only giant you see in the show.
No, in the show we see like 3 or 4 giants at the attack on the wall.
Oh yeah, so you see
and
some
most
of the
of them die,
yeah.
And then one is the only giant who makes it past the wall, and then he helps with the Battle of the Bastards, and then he gets killed by.
Are they usually friendly with humans or no?
No.
Oh, so that was sort of like
so they were wildlings. They were with the wildlings, and I think the only reason why they chose to be with them is because on the northern side of the wall, it's like a hellscape.
It's a hellscape with the White Walkers just killing everybody and raising.
So they had to
dead.
like partner up with them. And so I think it was becoming partners with them out of necessity at first, and then just naturally they kind of like...
It's one of my favorite quotes is, everybody is talking to Mance Rayder in the show, and it's like, how did I get all these tribes that want to kill each other to join forces? And he said, I went to them and I said, if we don't get south, you're all going to die.
Yeah.
Is the mountain pure human or is he half giant?
Mountain's pure human.
He's just a big
Like,
guy.
he might have some possible giant blood in him, like Hodor does. Like, they mentioned Hodor might have had giant's blood in him.
Is that why he can only say one?
No. That's a completely different thing.
You'll have to watch.
We can talk about that some other time, or you can watch it. But Hodor's just big. He's a really big dude, and the mountain's
bigger than Hodor.
Mountain's bigger than Hodor, so
but
it's like
he's just supposed to be like a freak of nature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they don't ever talk about him actually being of a giant's blood.
Yeah, he's just supposed to be like the biggest guy.
The mountain that rides is what he's fully called in the books.
Yeah,
which I love that moniker even more.
Yeah, he's a really cool character, but he is not a creature. He's just a normal guy.
Okay. Yeah. And they have their own civilization, the giants, and
Yes.
Yeah.
They, like I said,
they have stone giants.
Yeah,
in Lord of the Rings.
Stone giants particularly show up in The Hobbit.
Right.
I don't really like the way that they were portrayed in the movies because it makes it seem like they were. In the book, it makes it seem like they heard the giants were off, having giant football with each other with rocks where they're throwing them at each other. And so, obviously, if you know that that's happening in the mountains around you, you're going to go shelter down in a cave. Yeah. But no, in The Hobbit, they're like walking on them and, this whole cinematic thing, which cool. You acknowledge that the stone giants exist in your cinematic universe. I didn't like the way that they went about it.
Yeah, it was mostly all cinematic shit.
And Children of the Forest, they're also a race, not a creature.
Children of the Forest, they're a race.
Again, they're a race.
Not humans, but they are.
Yeah, because they're the ones who originated the religion of the old gods and everything. So they have their own sentience to them.
Yeah, so Game of Thrones has a lot of different races, just like Lord of the Rings does.
Yeah.
So it's races, not creatures. Creatures I would consider creatures in both worlds to be like less sentient. Less sentient. Those that need to be ridden or trained as opposed to has a mind of their own. Obviously, the eagles in Lord of the Rings sounds to be the exception.
Right, and Sheena Bog is kind of smart, isn't the spider? Is it Sheena Bog? Shelob, excuse me. Shelob has an intelligence, or is...
yes.
Because she speaks...
Semi.
In a sense?
Not in the movies. It's weird. So in, I believe it's Shadow of War, Shelob is like half human, half spider in that, which I don't think it's...
Not sure how that happened.
It's not really... I don't know how canon any of that is. I know they probably took bits and pieces of it. So that was weird. Because she could like talk and things. And I'm sure that like the spiders had their own language. And if I recall... I want to say the spiders in The Hobbit were talking when Bilbo was trying to save.
I don't know why, but
save all the dwarves.
I don't know if I'm misremembering this or if it's like it's a whole like.
It's been a bit
because I feel like Shelob was talking to Frodo when she was wrapping him up, but I also can't remember it.
I remember a woman's voice as well.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
You're not gonna get anywhere. I'm gonna eat you and suck you dry. And I was like, oh,
that might have been just a book thing then.
I know.
That I'm just not recalling.
I don't know why.
Because it definitely was not in the movie.
But yeah, again,
I just recently watched the movie and like Shelob is constantly just doing her little spider roars.
Right.
Which how does the spider do that? I don't know.
I think I would make the difference. Like you would have humanoid races and then you would have magical creatures.
Yeah.
Right. Humanoid.
So I just want to talk briefly on just some of the other things in Game of Thrones because they have a bunch of other creatures that are just mentioned in like world books. So you have kind of in the steed area, like with wargs, you have the character of Vargo Hoat, who he rides a Zorse, which is a zebra horse. Oh. And there's actually a full race of people in the far east of Essos who actually ride on Zorses, like Zorses predominantly. So
Martin's a fun guy.
Martin's a fun guy. And those actually exist.
Yeah,
like you can get those in real life.
It's like
and then
ligers.
You have and then you have in the continent of Sithorios, you have mention of giant gorillas that can kill an elephant with a single punch. They're one-punch gorillas, if I might say. You have these vampire bats that, unlike like normal vampire bats, can actually suck a man dry in an instant, like kill him.
Is that on a different continent, or is that on?
So you have Westeros, you have Essos, which is the really long one this way.
It's like west,
and
east.
then basically, and then Sithorios is actually below Essos.
Okay. And we don't really care much about that.
We don't really care much about it. I just want to mention some of these creatures because they are mentioned in the world book.
Are those more like wildlands, or are those like civilizations?
No, totally different.
No, totally different. Like any. I mentioned it a couple of times in the religion episode with Yin was this city that was like a reference to Lovecraft with its greasy black stones. And it's a city that's built in there, but every time somebody's ever tried to settle there, they just disappear. And part of that is also just due to the wildlife. You have all of these basilisks. You have raptor-like creatures that literally like are dinosaurs with this claw on their foot that like pinches into people. And Sothorios, if they ever explore more of that, Sothorios is actually one I would really like to find out.
It would make
more.
a really cool series.
It would be really cool just to kind of see like almost Christopher Columbus, but not horrible. Goes to Sothorios, and
I think it's cool when worlds have other continents to explore. Like,
absolutely,
the book's about this little place on this.
And the
continent,
funniest thing about it is so with Sothorios and all of its wildlife. It talks about how a dragon rider from old Valyria tried to fly across and figure out where the end of Sothorios was, and in 3 years of exploring, they could never find the end of it, which fascinates me because Martin has explicitly said his world's round. His world is round. Yeah. So there's a way to go from Westeros on this side all the way around back to Essos.
But it took that long to get there. So it's like it sounds like the Earth
is... So going south, it sounds like it's almost bigger than our planet in a way.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's bigger than our planet.
So, anyway, I'm trying to think of any other last-minute creatures I really want to
honestly,
discuss.
That pretty much covers it for Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So unless it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The only thing in my other research of Lord of the Rings is you almost kind of have, not necessarily the deep ones, but you have like... It talks about these creatures that are under the earth that are almost like...
Mole men?
No, not like mole men, but just... They're like dormant spirits under the earth that are eating away at it. It's weird.
That's cool.
That's the only mention I could really find of that. So that's interesting.
I mean, there's also the whole idea of like we don't explore the sea in Lord of the Rings.
No.
So who knows what lurks there?
No. Exactly.
But
literally the only thing we really know about one incident, like I said when we were talking about the Palantir in the magic episode, was one of them is at the bottom of the sea.
Right. And I think that's also interesting is because Game of Thrones focuses a lot on like there are seas and then there are these ports and then so there's a lot less need for things in the sky, which is why you might only have dragons. Whereas Lord of the Rings features not a lot of sea rivers and lakes at most.
Literally,
and
the most prominent port is literally the Grey Havens, and we only go there just obviously for Frodo to sail off to the Undying Lands and elves to sail off to the Undying Lands.
And so we kind of branch off more into the forests and the skies rather than that. So it's interesting. You have that the connection of like land, but then you have Lord of the Rings, which is more sky, and then you have Game of Thrones, which is more sea. Yeah, which I think is great. I think it's cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
We could just briefly mention the Ents. The Ents are really cool.
Oh, the tree Ents.
I consider them kind of their own race.
They are kind of a race.
They have a language. They have a way of doing things.
Yeah.
They have their Entmoots where they stand around for the whole day saying good morning.
That would not be a bad transition to our next episode. Actually, we covered creatures this time, but we've talked a little bit about race. Maybe that's what we jump into.
Maybe. Tune in next time and see what happens. Thanks for watching, guys.
Like, comment, and subscribe. Boise Bros Official on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and on...
Spotify?
Oh, Facebook. We don't have an album, maybe one day.
Thanks for watching Houses and Hobbits, guys. See ya.